But fear alone could never save the pirate empire. As the Royal Navy strengthened its patrols and merchant convoys sailed under heavier protection, the captains who had ruled the Atlantic found themselves hunted instead of feared. Their ships were captured, their crews scattered, and their leaders ended on the gallows. The Golden Age of Piracy collapsed under the weight of its own brutality, leaving behind only shattered wrecks, forgotten graves, and legends that still haunt the sea centuries later.
Enjoy the video, and don't forget to subscribe.
Trace your finger along the map from the Bahamas across the Caribbean and picture the year 1717 as the smell of rotting oak, boiling pine tar, damp hemp rigging, stale bilge water, salted beef, and lingering sulfur drifted across gray Atlantic swells beneath low clouds while snapping canvas echoed through every mast. The Golden Age of Piracy is often remembered as an era of buried treasure and fearless captains, yet its true foundation rested upon calculated murder, organized terror, and relentless intimidation stretching from the Windward Passage to the American colonies. Merchant captains rarely feared storms as much as the sudden appearance of a black flag rising above the horizon, because they understood that resistance could transform an ordinary boarding into a massacre lasting only minutes. Between approximately 1716 and 1722, hundreds of merchant voyages crossed waters patrolled by pirate sloops and brigantines, displacing between 80 and 120 tons, their pronounced tumble-home supported by massive white oak futtocks secured with hand-forged iron spikes measuring nearly 12 inches in length. During repeated careening operations, crews scraped away barnacles before forcing twisted oakum into every seam with heavy caulking irons and sealing the hull beneath boiling pine tar that hardened into a waterproof shield against the Atlantic. Pirate articles of agreement promised equal shares and compensation for injuries, yet those democratic rules applied almost exclusively inside the crew, while everyone outside remained a potential victim whose life possessed value only if ransom, cargo, or information could be extracted before violence began. The machinery of fear began long before boarding hooks struck the enemy rail, because experienced pirate captains understood that terror conserved ammunition more effectively than prolonged combat. A typical merchant brig carried perhaps 8 to 12 light cannon, while a heavily armed pirate flagship could mount more than 30 bronze guns cast from an alloy containing roughly 88% copper and 10% tin, with trace impurities that improved durability under repeated firing. Each discharge depended upon black powder composed of approximately 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur, ignited through a vent by glowing slow match that instantly generated expanding gases exceeding thousands of pounds of pressure against the shot before the recoil slammed the wooden carriage backward against thick breaching ropes. The iron ball rarely shattered an entire hull, yet it splintered white oak into razor-sharp fragments that ripped through flesh with greater lethality than the projectile itself. Pirates frequently fired only a single devastating broadside before raising the black flag and allowing smoke to conceal their true numbers, creating the illusion of overwhelming strength. Many merchant crews surrendered without another shot because survivors carried terrifying stories into every harbor from Port Royal to Charleston. Those accounts described captains displaying executed prisoners across the forecastle, threatening to burn ships with every sailor trapped below decks, or forcing witnesses to watch selected officers die before negotiations even began. Whether every threat was fulfilled mattered less than the reputation itself, because every rumor multiplied the psychological power of the next pirate encounter, while the Atlantic slowly became an ocean where fear traveled faster than any favorable wind. The economic engine behind this violence depended upon an astonishing network of stolen commerce rather than random raids, because every captured vessel represented floating wealth measured in sugar, tobacco, indigo, cacao, timber, textiles, firearms, medicine, and silver rather than mythical chests overflowing with gold. A merchant ship of 200 tons might carry cargo worth several years of wages for an ordinary sailor, making a successful seizure more profitable than months of legitimate trade. pirates studied shipping lanes with remarkable discipline, watching prevailing winds, seasonal currents, and convoy schedules while maintaining constant lookout from the masthead through polished spyglasses. Letters of marque issued during earlier European wars had already taught many experienced seamen how to intercept enemy commerce legally. And when peace ended, thousands of unemployed privateers simply abandoned legality while retaining every tactical lesson they had learned. Boarding parties prepared with cutlasses sharpened upon sandstone wheels, flintlock pistols inspected for dry priming powder, boarding axes capable of splitting hatch covers, and iron grappling hooks attached to heavy hemp lines nearly 1 inch thick. Once hulls collided, the struggle often lasted only moments as disciplined attackers rushed across the bulwarks before frightened defenders could reload their muskets. Resistance was answered with overwhelming brutality because pirates believed hesitation invited future defiance. Survivors frequently remembered not the number of dead, but the terrifying silence that followed the fighting. Broken only by waves striking damaged planking, wounded men crying beneath the orlop deck, and carpenters immediately inspecting shattered futtocks, cracked knees, sprung beams, and loosened chain plates to determine whether the captured vessel deserved repair, ransom, or destruction. Violence alone, however, could never have sustained the pirate world without discipline enforced from within, because every crew understood that betrayal, theft from common stores, or cowardice in battle threatened everyone's survival. The famous Articles of Agreement established detailed rules governing the distribution of prize money, compensation for injuries, gambling restrictions, weapon maintenance, and punishment for those who endangered the voyage. Before sunrise, sailors inspected every musket, cleaned rust from boarding blades, dried powder horns, tightened standing rigging, and examined blocks, deadies, shrouds, stays, and halyards for salt damage capable of dismasting the vessel during sudden squalls. Even a successful prize became worthless if neglected maintenance allowed seawater to penetrate weakened seams, causing the hull to absorb thousands of additional pounds of water until stability deteriorated dangerously. During routine careening, the ship was deliberately heeled onto one side at a sheltered beach where marine growth covering the planking was hacked away with iron scrapers before carpenters replaced damaged oak futtocks, drove fresh oakum deep into every seam using wooden mallets and caulking irons, and sealed the entire underwater surface beneath layers of steaming pine tar. These exhausting repairs often consumed weeks, leaving pirate crews vulnerable to surprise attack by Royal Navy patrols. Yet the same men capable of voting on supplies or electing officers could transform into ruthless executioners when an example became necessary. A sailor accused of hiding silver, signaling a merchant ship, or violating sworn loyalty risked flogging, marooning upon a barren island with little more than a musket and a flask of water, or immediate death before the assembled company. Fear therefore governed not only captured victims, but also the pirates themselves, binding every voyage together through the constant expectation that weakness carried fatal consequences. By 1722, the empire built upon fear had begun collapsing beneath the weight of its own reputation. Royal Navy squadrons expanded their patrols, colonial governors offered generous rewards, and merchant convoys increasingly sailed beneath armed escort instead of alone. Pirate sloops that had once dominated isolated sea lanes now faced disciplined warships carrying larger crews, heavier broadsides, and trained marines. Captured captains discovered that the terror they had inflicted upon others returned against them in the form of public trials, iron chains, and executions intended to frighten every sailor still tempted by the black flag. The same fear that had created pirate power now became the weapon used to destroy it. The Golden Age of Piracy was never sustained by buried treasure or romantic adventure, but by calculated violence reinforced through reputation, engineering, organization, and relentless psychological warfare. Every reinforced futtock, every carefully maintained cannon, every article of agreement, and every black flag served a single purpose: convincing victims that resistance meant certain death. For a few brutal years, that strategy reshaped Atlantic commerce, but no empire founded upon murder and fear could endure forever once governments answered terror with greater force and equal determination.